Hey everyone, and welcome back to another explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because honestly, we are diving into something that affects quite literally every single one of us who owns a smartphone. Today, we're breaking down the newly released National Crime Records Bureau, or NCRB, report for 2024. And let me tell you, the data reveals a massive, traumatic shift in India's crime landscape. We are witnessing a fundamental transition from traditional, physical offenses out on the streets to highly sophisticated, borderless crimes right on our screens. The entire way we need to think about safety has changed, and today we're going to use the raw data to understand exactly what is happening out there.
So, how are we going to tackle this massive report? Well, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. First, the Great Crime Paradox. Second, the cyber epidemic unleashed. Third, inside digital fraud syndicates. Fourth, targeting the vulnerable. And finally, building the human firewall.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the Great Crime Paradox, and how statistics can sometimes be a bit of an illusion.
At first glance, right, the headline numbers actually look pretty great. The NCRB data shows that total cognizable crimes in India actually went down by 6% in 2024. We dropped from roughly 6.2 million cases in 2023 to about 5.8 million cases. So on paper, the crime rate just dipped to its lowest point since 2019. If you just stopped reading there, you'd probably think, awesome! Traditional crimes like theft and robbery are declining, the streets are getting safer. But you know there's a catch, right? That is really only half the story.
Because here is where that illusion of safety kind of falls apart. That overall drop we just talked about, it was actually artificially deflated by a major legal change. See, with the implementation of India's new criminal code, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, simple physical hurt was reclassified as a non-cognizable offense. Because of that specific change, cases registered under that category saw a massive 30% decline. And this drop on paper completely masked a stark underlying shift, a whopping 17% explosion in cybercrimes. So the physical world might look a bit safer in the general data, but the digital world, completely different story.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2, the cyber epidemic unleashed. We are officially pivoting off the physical streets and into the borderless digital Wild West, because the sheer volume of this threat is honestly staggering. For the very first time, digital offenses have crossed the 100,000 mark, hitting 1.01 lakh reported cases in 2024 alone. This unabated surge pushed the national cybercrime rate up to 7.3 per 100,000 people. And keep in mind, authorities are very clear that there is significant underreporting here, especially out in rural areas. So the real number? It's likely much, much higher.
So, what's actually driving all this? What are the criminals after? Well, a massive 70% of these attacks boil down to one singular motive: financial fraud. They want your money. And we aren't just talking about those old clunky email scams from a decade ago. We're talking about highly sophisticated AI-enabled phishing, incredibly accurate voice cloning, and really complex investment scams that are specifically designed to drain bank accounts before you even realize what's happening.
And speaking of sophisticated, let's talk about the absolute most terrifying new trend of 2024. It's called the digital arrest. Now, I want you to vividly imagine this for a second. You're sitting in your living room, minding your own business, and you get a video call. You answer, and the person on the screen is wearing a highly realistic police or investigative agency uniform. They've got an official-looking backdrop, forged documents, the whole shebang. They aggressively tell you your identity has been implicated in something severe, like money laundering or drug trafficking. And then they threaten you with immediate incarceration unless you instantly transfer your life savings to a so-called secure account. It is literal psychological warfare, and extortion cases using this exact method spiked exponentially this year.
Okay, moving on to part 3. Inside digital fraud syndicates. Who is actually pulling this off?
We really have to understand that cybercrime has completely evolved. We're way past the days of some lone hacker in a dark basement. First off, these bad actors are weaponizing generative AI to execute hyper-personalized deepfakes at machine speed. Second, India's incredibly successful digital public infrastructure, while amazing, has rapidly expanded the surface area for these attacks. Third, and this is crucial, regional hotspots like Jamtara and Mewat have essentially evolved into highly organized, institutionalized syndicates. They're operating like malicious corporate enterprises, exploiting vast networks of mule bank accounts and forged SIM cards. And finally, they aren't just going after individuals anymore. They are actively targeting vulnerable critical infrastructure, ranging from healthcare systems to actual power grids.
To ground these abstract threats in real geography, it's fascinating to see how a state's profile dictates its crime. States with massive IT penetration are now the absolute prime targets for these digital syndicates. Telangana, for example,
recorded the highest cybercrime rate in the entire country, with over 70 cases per 100,000 people. Contrast that with Uttar Pradesh, which still records the highest overall per capita crime rate when you factor in all the physical offenses, or Nagaland, which continues to record the lowest overall crime rate in India. Make no mistake, the tech hubs are the new front lines.
Let's shift to part 4, targeting the vulnerable, because we need to know who is at the highest risk.
Behind all of these data points are real human beings, and the reality the data reveals is pretty harsh. While overall crime might have dipped on paper, crimes against vulnerable populations spiked significantly. There was a near 17% spike in crimes against senior citizens in just one single year. And the report explicitly notes this is heavily driven by theft, forgery, cheating, and fraud. Syndicates are directly actively hunting our elderly, exploiting their trust and their relative unfamiliarity with digital deception. We also saw alarming increases in crimes against children and juveniles in conflict with the law.
And why is this happening? Well, here's the root cause of that massive vulnerability. Only about 38% of Indian households are actually considered digitally literate. When you break that down, it's about 61% in urban areas and a mere 25% in rural areas. This creates what we can call a massive human firewall deficit. Millions of new internet users are coming online every day, stepping straight into a world of zero-day exploits and AI deepfakes, completely lacking the basic digital literacy required to spot a social engineering scam. They are just entirely exposed.
Which brings us to our final section, part 5, building the human firewall. Let's talk solutions.
So, how do we actually fight back against this epidemic? We need a progressive, multi-layered defense strategy. Step 1 requires deep structural reform. We have to move past relying solely on generalist police forces. We need specialized cyber cadres. And we need to elevate agencies like the I4C to a statutory national status so they can properly handle these borderless crimes. Step 2 is fighting code with code. We need AI-led predictive policing to instantly identify high-risk digital signatures and shut down those mule accounts in real time. And step 3, probably the most vital piece of the puzzle, is social justice. Through a national digital hygiene mission using behavioral nudges, we have to actively train everyday citizens to spot scams like the digital arrest before they become victims.
At the same time, we've got to lock down the systems themselves. India's digital public infrastructure, things like UPI and Aadhaar, are phenomenal successes, right? But they process a massive, massive amount of wealth. The report highlights the absolute necessity of integrating security by design into these digital pipelines. By adopting what the industry calls zero-trust architectures, we ensure that the system constantly, relentlessly verifies every single user and transaction. This automatically blocks sophisticated phishing attempts before they ever even reach a vulnerable person's bank account.
So, zooming out from all this high-level policy and raw data, from the crazy surge in cyber fraud to the heartbreaking targeting of the elderly, I actually want to pose a direct question to you. Is your personal human firewall strong enough to protect your family's digital frontier? Have you actually sat down and spoken to your parents about these digital arrest scams? Do you rigorously verify unexpected video calls or urgent requests for money? Transforming this complex governance issue into a moment of personal responsibility is absolutely the first real step in turning the tide. And that brings us to our final thought. There's a quote directly from the report that I think hits the nail right on the head, perfectly summarizing everything we've unpacked today. It says, "The challenges have fundamentally shifted from managing physical law and order to securing the digital frontier." The NCRB 2024 data is a massive, flashing wake-up call for all of us. The streets might be changing, but the real beat for policing and for our own personal vigilance is now online. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe out there, stay skeptical of those unknown video calls, and keep learning.